Gearman, the job server, made to be distributed. Pretty awesome in my opinion. We leverage it at Bridge pretty heavily. We send out all of our emails through it. We're sending, gosh, I can't even remember how many anymore. Basically, it builds all of our templates. It's basically assigning everything. We run all of our email processing for our jets, which are called journal email notifications. We'll send out sometimes a bulk of like 50,000 at a time. So we build all those through the background processing. We built a system called ET, which is our email tracker, which does a lot of fun basics before encoding and signing of the email, so we can actually get it down to a message identifier and track it back on the front end, which is just combining log files and things like that that we can push into our BI server. We have various other crazy things like all of our push notifications go through it. I'm working on trying to get our images to go through it. That's trying to make our UX team understand that they don't need an immediate response, so we can just kind of have a little queue thing. But until then, we're going to be stuck with our 32 gigabyte web servers. 32 gigs of memory. If we have too many people uploading at one time, CPU usage goes through the roof, so not fun. Gearman can solve a lot of those problems for you. It's pretty fast, pretty efficient. It's written in C. It does have problems from time to time because the guy's been refactoring it and breaking all sorts of crazy stuff. So the PHP extension sometimes gets into a race condition, blows things up. They can handle it, just kill it, restart it, you're good to go. Just make sure you use the persistent queue if you're going to restart the job server. So I wish my mouse was going to work, but there we go. I have to be closer. Glad to be on my better. Software engineer manager at Bridge. I organize the Minnesota PHP user group. We like people to come there. If you want to talk about PHP, you should come talk because I don't like to talk all that often. Not mentioning my free talks today. I'm an open source contributor. I generally am found to contribute to the Zen Framework project. Zen Framework 2 is kind of in this weird beta alpha, almost non-usable state. You can use it, but everything's changing, so you have to rewrite it almost every release. And various others that I get involved in. There's a Theorem pair server that I've written. It's basically a little hack to download other people's packages and clone them into my own repository so I don't have to rely on their upgrades or whatever to test them. So I'm on Twitter, I'm on Google+, I'm on IRC. I have a blog, but it doesn't get updated like it ever should be. And GitHub has all sorts of fun stuff in there. There we go. So we're going to talk about what is Gearman. What are the main concepts, kind of a quick start, a little bit of details, and some simple live use cases, and then if you have questions, just bring them up, whatever. We can talk through them. Help me waste some time. So, we're going to talk about what is Gearman, their official statement. Gearman provides a generic application framework to farm out work to other machines or processes that are better suited to do the work. It allows you to do work in parallel, load balance processing, call functions in between languages. So, what that ultimately means is that Gearman consists of a daemon, a client, a worker. Or they're simply just small programs, much like your awk, all of your different batch programs as well, CAD, etc. The daemon handles the negotiation of the work between the client and the worker. So the worker's going to do all the work, the client's going to send the request that needs to be done, the daemon's just handling the handoff, any persistent storage, has some other plugins that you can leverage. So in a picture, this is more or less how it looks. You have your application code. Generally, you're going to have a Gearman client API, depending on what you're using. You can use it from the command line itself, but it's got C, PHP, Perl. There's a MySQL plugin, which I'm definitely afraid of, and more. But your client's going to interact with the job server, and it's going to send it to the worker, and you have worker application code that's on the bottom, and your application code on top. So generally, your worker application code is running in the background, taking in the work from the client. You can either return it synchronously or asynchronously. So you kind of have two options there. Works on Linux. You're not going to get very far on Windows. Yeah, I just have it in there. Well said. Yeah. API implementations are available for PHP, Perl, Java, Ruby, Python, and various others. You can go look at their source code repo and kind of find what they're working on. So the main concept, this is is your client daemon worker communication. Your API is going to send a message, which is your workflow, to the Gearman server. As long as there's a worker connected to it, it's going to send it to that worker. The worker's going to process it. You can send it back to the job server in a synchronous workflow, and you can actually get it back from your client if you wanted to. So that's where you're going to want to try to farm a couple things out at once. They do a distributed processing of like 4 or 5 things all at once and return them at the end of the response. They work great in API communication, so you need to fetch things from 5 APIs and display on one page. That's one way of doing it so that you don't have all that overhead. Or use curl, but you know, we're talking in terms of Gearman today. It can be very distributed. You're going to have to write mostly your own distribution code. What we do at Caring Bridge is we basically just model the number of servers and farm it out based off of random. So each client's going to connect to the job server, performing the work. The workers are actually just on the specific boxes that they are on, so we don't have to go through any network overhead. And we have 2 job servers running right now with probably about 40 workers or so. Might be more, might be less, I don't remember. So, the real easy stuff, quick start. Head to gearman.org, click on download, click on the Launchpad download, download the binary, unpack the binary. You can configure, make, and make install, and you're off. So, one thing to note here is that it has several plugins if you want to do persistent storage. Generally, you need to configure those, and you'll also have pass command line options to the Gearman daemon. This is kind of the easiest way to get going. So here's a real simple example. If you start the daemon, you can actually define all the worker by using the Gearman command line interface. -w is just basically saying, hey, I'm going to be a worker. And all we're saying here is that we're going to basically just do a quick program. So what we're actually just going to do is get the word count of XE password. So my mouse is moving. Probably zoom this in a few times. It's already running. All right. So actually, I'll just do this in 2 windows so it'll be easier. See what's kind of going on. So our worker, we have Gearman-W. I always forget what I can just copy and paste this. It's easier. So that's now my daemon is actually running. So it's just kind of sitting there waiting for input. And I don't have an XE password file under my user index.
You have a Windows
I have a Windows -L. That's awesome. Windows does not play well with. There we go. So now it's actually just returning to my client program. I have 38 lines. So pretty simple, pretty easy. Keeps running until you stop it. Generally, you're just going to run them in a while loop. So if you're going to go PHP style, I stole this example from the manual. You have a Gearman worker. You just call add servers automatically going to a local host. You're adding a function called reverse. That's going to be exposed from the client. So the client will actually call reverse. And then you're actually telling Gearman to execute the myReverse function when it has a job. So no matter how many jobs it has, it's going to just always call that function. It's going to return it. So we're doing this synchronously. Do background just the other one if you don't want it synchronously. You want to go asynchronously. So that's just going to print all the world backwards. Yay. That's really fun. So we all like to talk about ourselves. I wrote a layer on top of Zen framework, uniquely called Zen Gearman. I was just going to go to that real quick. So any of you use Zen framework at all? Okay, this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. So I wrote a little layer on that basically allows you to register your functions easier, handles kind of memory limits, timeouts by default. So we'll call the timeout function. Say you have a database connection. Database connections generally have a timeout of themselves if you don't do anything, and sometimes reconnecting to them is not very easy to use something like Doctrine. But basically, it'll do some initialization, timeout, shutdown, and work. So it can basically do anything it needs to do. Has a custom dispatch layer, makes it really easy to keep everything up and running. So that's just my shameless tidbit of self-promotion. So some of the details. Persistence. By default, Gearman's going to store everything in memory. It's actually the best way to do it. If you start using persistent queues, it doesn't always work as great as you want it to. So unless you need it, don't do it. Most of them work. We've encountered specifically issues with it just starting to hang, having trouble with file locking or database locking, and all hell breaks loose, so we have to restart the job server. Which is great, we have the persistent queue, so it still works. But you can use libdrizzle, SQLite, memcache, Postgres, GoDeal cabinet, MySQL, Redis. Their actual adapter is pretty easy to add new queues to it. It's really not all that bad. So when you're going to get up and running with persistent queues, likely it's going to require specific attributes to say I need a couple to this library, or I need a couple to this other library. Some additional arguments are needed for the Gearman layer. So everything's built as a plugin as well. So here's just kind of their plugins in their repository. You want to see how easy they are actually to build. They're just basically passing them up. It's pretty simple, nothing crazy. Simple classes, etc. So if you just do like the baseline configuration, this is generally what you're going to have. You're not going to have all of them. Most of those are new as well. So this is the one that actually comes with Ubuntu if you install it through app. Pretty simple. We actually run SQLite right now, trying to get us away from it, but we need a better service background. It's clients, the consent works with the Gearman server. Everything that you send to it is inside of a workload. Pretty easy. Utilize an open format, please. If you wanted to go to like something like Python and you're pushing it into PHP and you serialize an object, I don't think Python will ever figure out what the hell you put in it. So be courteous to your fellow developers. Workers are the dudes in the factory. They do all the work. Generally, they're going to run a daemon in the background. Workers will register a function that they perform. They should only do one task. You can actually register multiple functions. Letting them do one task makes it a little bit more scalable so that you can distribute the workload a little bit easier. The worker does the work and can return results if you're doing synchronously. But most of the time, if you're probably going to this model, you're going to be doing everything asynchronously. It's just kind of I don't know. I've never used it. Eric, have you used the synchronous methods in Gearman?
Yeah, I've used both the background tasks and the live tasks. It's really easy if you think of it in terms of like kind of Ajax stuff. When I send it to you, do I care what you say, or can I just move on right away?
Yep.
And there's really no logic you need beyond that.
Exactly. So some special notes. If you're using the database, like I said earlier, make sure you have the ability to reconnect to the database. You're also going to want to watch for connection timeouts. We do a select one like every minute or something on some of our workers, just because we can't lose the connection. If we do, we have to kill off the worker. Memory leaks, pretty typical in PHP. It will eventually start to run out of your memory, so just kill the worker. Same with if you're doing your, depending on your language, PHP, for instance, has like I think it's like 200 requests. If you look at like a PHP FPM, which is just fast CGI processing, as you actually execute it, it's just going to start to slow down or get real buggy, so you can just kill it. So which brings me to trying to keep the daemon running. Workers sometimes have issues. They're going to die. You're going to throw an exception. You need to boot it back up with a restart. Utilizing the service to watch them is good because they die and all of a sudden your boss comes over to you and it's like, what the hell? And you have 500,000 things in a queue that you can't process for 2 days. that's not going to be a good thing. So Supervisor D can watch your processes, restart them if they die, kill, can manage multiple processes or just one. You can start to stop your workers with it. When you're running your workers, handle signals, please. Otherwise, you can kill stuff when it's actually in between work. So handling the kill signals is a good thing.
Do you always use Supervisor D to run Gearman typically, or?
I don't use it to run Gearman itself. I use it for my workers.
Oh, okay.
So I'll boot up, say, like 10 processes of our email sending process. And as I kill them off, it's just going to boot up another one automatically for me. So it's keeping everything running. It's kind of the glue between both.
Okay.
Have you used Supervisor?
I have, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we use it to run, I think, the celery process.
Okay. So I was just going to say, before we, have cron jobs and bash, all sorts of fun stuff to manage it. Supervisor is just deserves 2 sessions on its own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does. It's
One of those things,
It's a really, really awesome project. It's built in Python. It works very well in most cases. If you install it through a package manager, or if you're using something like Red Hat, be very, very careful because a lot of those processes, if you basically do a service stop, it's going to wait like 10 seconds or so, and if everything hasn't finished processing or you're handling your kill signals, you're going to have some zombie processes just chilling out there doing absolutely nothing. And when they zombie, in PHP at least, they go mad crazy and get the job server spike my CPU load up to like 99%. It's really bad when they zombie. So it's something to be careful about. So this is Supervisor. You basically specify a program, you have a command, you tell it the process, how many processes, directories, UMass, priorities, does it auto start? You auto restart the processes, how long do processes have to be running in order to be successful? If they fail so many times in a row, like start retry, for instance here it says 3. If it failed 3 times in a row without being able to start for 10 seconds, it's not going to try to boot them up again. So that's the one thing you do have to be careful about, but usually you have other problems that happen. So pretty simple configuration, start it and it actually just does all the work for you. Monitoring. So this is news to me. Until recently, you had to just basically use the socket interface, telnet it, status it, and bring it back to all of your wherever you're reporting all your sysadmin stuff. We use Zabbix. We have a couple of custom scripts that report back to Zabbix. But now there's a Gearman Monitor PHP project. I've never tried it, but it's referenced. And I don't know, Eric, you tried this thing?
It's painful.
It's painful.
It's not there yet.
So I should still continue to use my telnet?
Yeah, stick with telnet.
Or what about Nagios?
I mean, really, it depends what kind of monitoring you're doing. I've got a cacti script that continually sends basically a quick telnet to see how many jobs are sitting there. But
jobs, workers, how much is actually doing stuff.
Yeah, but PHP monitor, it'll get there someday, but it's not production yet.
Well, at least it's made more progress in the Gear Up monitoring service that was supposed to be coming for like the last 3 years. So that's not coming, I don't think. One thing to note about monitoring with Gearman is that the status output is not always entirely correct. Most of the time it's fairly close, but sometimes it'll say like there's workers that are connected and working on stuff that aren't actually there. Sometimes you do have to just verify it on the box itself. So all the fun stuff now, I'm going to chew up a lot of time, so the questions are going to be good. So I put together 3 simple use cases, just to kind of show you how everything works. Start off with images. If you're resizing images on the web server, my earlier example, they should serve and they should be processing images. Sure, let it handle the upload, but if you're resizing them on the box, it takes a lot of CPU power. Say you have 100 people that also do it at once, and they all hit the same server. That server's going to be pretty pissed off. One of the easiest things to do is process them on their own, have your own Gearman server off to the side. You can have as many workers as you need, but as you're doing workers, I mean, you're going to be having it 1 at a time, or 2 at a time, or 3 at a time. And generally, you're going to be doing that very fast, definitely if the box is dedicated to doing it. So in this case, when you're doing a background job, you can get a job identifier from Gearman itself. And you can actually do a status check against the Gearman box. So you could be using your Ajax calls or whatever to check up on it. Once it's completed, you can show them the next screen. So this is what I'm talking about, some of the workflow stuff to make it more seamless. So, yeah, I stole this one too. Gearman examples. Basically, this is just the example of the worker. What you can do is you basically just send the blob data from the image, and you're going to my resize function, create the new image magic. You're grabbing all the workload, the job workload, checking the thumbnail height, scaling it, and you can get the image blob back and return it back to the thing that sent it, or you can just save it if you don't care about the output. Pretty simple, huh? Okay. Email, one of my favorite ones. Generating template, variables, sometimes it takes up a lot of time. We use Zen Framework for everything that we're sending emails out for. If we have to send out, say, 200 emails when somebody clicks the post button, it's not exactly the best thing to do and make them wait. So we send that all through our queues. Every single email we send goes through a queue. We built an email tracker that does all sorts of crazy stuff, and we just send a JSON string down, compile it up, push all our views to a template, parse the templates, and push the template into a mail function. Most of the time you don't care if the mail function says false or not, so it's a perfect one for the background. So the most rudimentary example you can do is register a function called email. This is my email function. My worker's just in there working, it's just going to call this. Say it's JSON with an email to subject and body. Yay, that was really rudimentary. I have more examples if I could actually connect to my VPN from here. Unfortunately, Best Buy does not like you to connect to other things that can mask your traffic, I'm guessing. So this is a really fun one. Gearman can basically, because it has a command line function, you can bind it to, say, like custom log function of Apache. You can do all sorts of crazy stuff when you start taking in all the logs and things into your Gearman server. Say you're going to do crazy analytical data. You can be parsing it and loading it up all the time. You know, if you don't want to run cron like nightly, like AW stats or something like that, pretty worthless. But if you don't want all your data in Google or any of the other big players, you want to spare yourself some money and want to do it yourself, this is one way to do it. So all it really takes is custom log, and you're just piping it to the function. And in my example, I'm just putting it to file clip contents, and it's going to have some crazy locking issues, and things are going to get really slow, but just for example purposes, you basically get a log line, you put all that content in the log, and everything's happy. Let's say you wanted to do more on here, you can split it up, use some regular expressions, do all sorts of crazy fun stuff. And as you find that your capacity is getting bad, just boot up a couple more workers. You need a new machine, you boot up a couple more workers, stock to that Gearman server. So that's how it gets distributed very easily and very quickly. Yeah, I blew through that really quick. I had like 40 slides, dude. 30 slides, I don't know. Could you use it? Oh, go ahead.
I was wondering how you handle like error checking or something like that. So, for example, I was looking at something that does a lot of HTTP requests and stuff like that. Now that we are doing that in queue, how would you handle that kind of stuff?
So in Gearman itself, they return constant. So when you actually are working, this would probably be nice to just do this. So there we go. So Gearman has a couple different constants, especially in the PHP worker. You have Gearman timeout, things that don't equal success. You can handle the error and put it back in queue if you wanted to. If you're doing it synchronously, you can send a response back. If you're actually within your program itself, you can grab the job code and check on the job later on. That's one easy way to do it.
Question, is this in like the main loop of, if you will, of the
Yes.
server? Okay.
Yeah. So
That line 99 is really the heart of
Yeah,
what's
yeah,
going
file
on.
work, yeah. Just
yeah, because work is going to return false, and you're going to want to use the suppression operator in this case. I don't like it, but Gearman work gives you some sometimes it's stupid output in PHP where it doesn't make any sense and you can't handle it. And we have some crazy exception handling that we turn all errors to exceptions, and then it gets really awful. But everything's going to come through the return code after that anyhow. So I think there's about a variety of 5 different constants at this point now for the newer server. This was built when they only had really like 2 or 3. Yeah, that is
your question.
Yeah, I'm all on it.
okay.
Well, maybe my case example. So I have a coding editor application that I'm working on that is doing a bunch of indexing and captions and stuff like that, and background jobs. And I wrote my own like really shitty queuing. It's not really really work. So I want to be able to have when it makes HTTP requests to their website and pulls data in, and say that we get, I guess, like a 404 error or like a 500 error temporarily. I would like to capture that somehow in the job. Like, is that something? How would I go about doing that with this? Maybe
you can fail the worker yourself if you want to. So you do have the ability to actually tell the Gearman daemon itself that it failed. The function is
I could write my own kind of status code or capture, like, say it was a curl request, for example, and curl return a bunch of noise, and you have to capture that error somewhere and store it.
Yeah, I mean, if you detect it in your own application, like within an if statement, I mean, it's just PHP itself, or whatever, so you can store wherever you want. You can log all your Gearman stuff out. So like supervisor, we hook up the log and we just log everything out to a flat file. So you can tell the supervisor to do that. Otherwise, you have to do it on your own. But then you can parse through that log later as well if you wanted to. You can even send it to another Gearman worker as a background task and say, go figure this out. So you can actually chain things together if you want to. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay.
Another question then. So, say you have a Gearman server that is not running, say, I know this is a special instance, but I have a web server that's like this cheap web server that's running on like Webfaction or whatever.
Okay.
If I had another box, let's say I'm like Amazon 2 or something like that, or another data center or something like that was doing all the Gearman workload, how could I make 2 different servers communicate? Like, how do I communicate with Gearman if it's on another machine? Can I do that over like a SSH tunnel or something like that, or is that
SSH channel?
Is that a stupid way? I mean, or is there like an API that I can call Gearman?
There is an HTTP protocol as well.
Okay.
If you want to use it, I've never used it. Frankly, it scares me a little bit. I don't like the overhead of HTTP, but I mean, if you're going between data centers or something else, you have other network issues that you're going to have to play around with as well. So I don't know if there's a really good solution for that.
Okay. That's actually all I use. It's the HTTP across data center handling.
There you go.
And as long as you know your stuff on, HTTPS, port blocking, IP, where your ranges are, there's no security, and I get as fast performance going across, across different EC2 data centers as within the server itself.
So I got a question about divvying up tasks. So I guess first one to kind of answer maybe or ask a variation of his question is, so you can tell the Gearman worker that the job failed, and does that cause it to be the job to be requeued again, or
Yeah.
okay.
You have to requeue it.
It's just
if
okay.
you want to queue it up again.
Okay, and then what? So let's say I put a bunch of jobs in the job queue, and then I have another monitoring thing that says when my queue is too big, I need to bring up another worker. Will that worker get some of the tasks that are in queued, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, as long as they're connected to the server, the workers themselves are just constantly pinging the job server when they're available for work.
Okay.
So if they're working on a task, it's gonna be the next one to ask for the next job that's gonna get it.
Okay.
Most of the time it is more FIFO, but it's not really guaranteed, and we've seen it where it doesn't do that. But most of the time you're just going to pick up right where you need it. So that's why you just add workers if you need it. So it's not putting an exclusive lock on all of the jobs.
Okay. Just trying to get my head around it a little bit. I don't yet totally understand, but so the job server effectively operates like the queue, correct?
Correct.
Now, if there's multiple job servers, are those multiple independent queues? Is there priority over that? Because I can understand how you could have n worker nodes beneath the job queue, but I don't understand the relationship with the job queue, multiple jobs.
Yeah, the job queues don't talk to each other.
Okay. So if one crashes with all the stuff in it, it crashes with the stuff in it.
Persistence.
Persistence, sure. Okay.
That's your solution. That's your only
And it's
solution.
a common architecture to set up a bunch of worker nodes maybe on separate machines that just have them pull from the job server.
Yep.
And that's okay. Cool.
Yeah, I mean, we run them all. So we run our Gearman server, and we have all the workers on that same server. Mainly just because we can. We have the memory and the CPU usage on it. I mean, the Gearman server itself doesn't take up very much, so we'd be kind of wasting that box if we didn't.
Nope.
Yeah, the daemon itself is just taking all the queue stuff. It'll push it out into the persistent queue if you have one, but the Gearman daemon itself doesn't really do anything. It's pretty stupid. It's just, it accepts work, puts it in a queue. It'll automatically create the queue if you tell it, hey, here's register this function. It'll just create it. You have to create the queue before the client sends work, though. If you don't do that, then it gets a little messy. They might have changed it lately, but at the point when I was using it, it would just lose the work.
How do you handle failover when you've got a multiple job server scenario? Let's say, okay, I do fast work to job server A. I get far enough so that I think you're going to job queue. Let's say something that really, really has to get done. That job server dies. It's persistent. It knows all about that task. Meanwhile, the client code decides, hey, I really need this task to get through. Can I do the other one? What kind of failover practices?
If you have a persistent queue, you end up just booting up another Gearman server and connecting it to that queue. So this is where things like SQLite are pretty much useless, because if you lose the box, it's
Right.
done.
As long as your persistence is on another instance.
Yep. I mean, that's why they have some of the database stuff, some of the Redis stuff, so that you can also replicate that. That's very expensive. Most of the time, you're not going to have stuff that's going to be sitting in the queue too long. And if you lose one thing, is it really that terrible? Is it something that you can't recover from?
It's an email to the president.
Even more worthless. No, so to answer the other part of that, if you can add multiple servers, if the server does go down, it will just stop talking to it, and it'll just start talking to the one that's still there. If you lose both the server nodes, and this will not automatically reconnect when they come up, so you'll have to reboot your workers.
You have to implement your own consistent hashing for distributing the job to the different servers. Like if one goes down, does everything overload the other one? Or?
It would, yeah. You do have to put, if you have multiple servers in there, so here's one of the fun pieces of this. Workers can pull from multitude of different servers and they'll be just fine. If you put the client on multiple servers, it's going to send the work to all of those servers. And I don't think there's anything else that you can do to separate them out.
I think the important thing to think, the Gearman server, don't think of it in terms of like the MySQL server. We have two for redundancy, but one on a Amazon EC2 small server can handle 40 million jobs with a meg each, and it only dies when Amazon has a data center go down. Disney is a very big Gearman user. Craigslist is a big Gearman user, and they have like 2 or 3 boxes, and the sole point is redundancy. It's the server itself doesn't have any load issues ever.
Yeah.
What's the sizing of your inboxes? Did you have 2 running, or?
Yeah, we have 2 running. We're kind of a special case. All of our web servers that we buy have a very large amount of memory. So we dedicate like 32 gigs to every single instance that we have. For Gearman, that's like the biggest overkill that you could possibly do. So that's why we run all of our workers on the same machine, because we can't. We have too much stuff running there.
How big are your boxes, if you can say?
Most, we don't ever go above an Amazon EC2 medium. I don't know how familiar you are with EC2, but it's
A little bit less.
basically if you have, it all depends on how much work the actual worker is going to be doing. And so then it's just scalability of the worker, but the server itself is just a tiny bit of overhead. And like you hinted at, you're going to find your PHP memory leaks really, really quickly. Because if it's just doing a while loop forever and there's an array that's never getting unset,
Even if it is.
yeah, after 1,000 loops you'll kill it, and that's where supervisor helps too. But most commodity hardware will easily support the whole Gearman worker and server overhead. It's just what your worker itself is actually doing.
Yeah. It does a lot of crazy stuff. I wish I could show you some of mine, but I mean, the daemon itself is really, really small in terms of memory. If you're processing everything in memory, here's another note that I forgot to say. Your queues, while they might be persistent, are also stored in memory. Gearman actually stores everything in memory and then updates your queue. And I have to look at the source code again. I'm not sure exactly how many times it does it, but the only thing you need to be careful about if you're talking memory related is don't stick a whole bunch of stuff in queue and not process it. Because that's where your memory will grow.
Well, sort of a related question, what are the best practices for dealing with very large workloads?
Split them off.
Split them up.
Like what if it's an enormous binary image, for example?
Have a server that's capable of processing that binary image.
Because I would guess that even if it's sort of buffering and writing onto that persistent data store, if you're slamming a gigabyte of data into a single task workload and there's no way to subdivide that data, that's going to be bad news for whatever if your group is providing persistence.
Maybe.
Can I throw up?
Sure.
I'm sorry if I'm smoking too much of the Amazon hype right now, but the logical way to do that would be that string that you pass to the worker it's the command that you're working on. It doesn't have to be the actual workload.
Yep.
So you could pass like your 1 gig image that you're going to process, send that to S3, get the token from S3, and then the worker just pulls it from S3 instead. So, and that's one lesson that we learned really quickly is that you don't slam everything into the workload and the JSON and code. We first used PHP serialized array, and then realized we don't really care about if it's a 1 in the string or int. But that workload that you pass in can be tiny. It's just an instruction for where it gets the rest of the data. So,
yeah, I was just wondering if there's sort of a experimentally derived upper bound where, your workload is now this many bytes. You should really be storing a surrogate key into something else.
And it's no different than if you were firing up a bunch of cron jobs to execute the task itself or just watching Apache handle it.
Essentially the same thing. It's just the only thing is that you have control over the client and you have control over the work. I mean, the job server is just there to basically be the index between the two. It's just a glue. The beauty of it is just that it's asynchronous. I mean, a lot of things can do asynchronous and synchronous. RabbitMQ for PHP, you can't do synchronous unless you were to go fetch the workload right afterwards and store it somewhere. So that's kind of the beauty of Gearman, and not a lot of other things do. Like specifically PHP don't really do that. People have tried to do it with making things with Redis, software on top of Redis, try to make it still happen, but it's kind of the only thing.
The downside of Gearman over Redis is that Redis and Celery all use a standardized language and API. Gearman's making it up on their own.
Yep.
So a lot of companies, I'm guessing VMware, needs to use a standard pre-structured API, and unless you're like an Etsy or DeviantArt, you can make it up as you go, and you don't really have to report to anybody. Fortunately, Gearman's not going to do it if you have to report how it's doing, why it's doing it. Also, Googling for any Gearman-related stuff sucks. Because if you search, like, Gearman worker keeps dying, Google automatically corrects Gearman to German, and you just get all these factories. It's so sad.
It is fun though.
I hot rodded my 42 Ford.
Whoever wants to go first.
You can go ahead.
Okay, go.
Scheduling jobs to happen at a certain time?
In the PHP API and some of the other APIs, no. The Gearman job server has added an epoch scheduling time. I'm not sure if it even works. Last time I checked the source code, the support was just getting in there, but you couldn't actually push a job in that would actually do it because they were just breaking. They would just store it as a regular job and it would still get processed. I know they are working on it. They've said that they were working on it a long time ago, but there's actually source code now behind it. It's just a matter of all the APIs looking into it and making sure it's stable and actually using it. Have you played with looking at it at
I
all?
want it so bad, but we've got just cron jobs that handle the schedule before it sets it off. It'll be neat, but then you also get server bloat.
Exactly. That's part of the thing that they were also talking about.
They're also working on getting the installation easier, because that you make it download the configure and make and install. Sometimes it's not that simple. And they're they're working on getting more app packages out in RPM.
So you need LibBoost, and it needs to be a specific version. And so if you already have it on the OS and you need to override that package if something's relying on it, that's not so much fun. We at Hearing Bridge have a package called CB LibBoost to install it into its own location. libevent is used. Red Hat generally comes with that pre-installed. So in order to get rid of it, you have to basically override it and make it yourself. Yet again, CB libevent. So there are some fun points in getting things configured and installed. Nobody likes to talk about that because it's not fun.
Yeah. I like the speed that Gearman gives me. It's just, I couldn't get that with Rabbit or Zoner.
Yeah, so here's the new epoch. It's in so they actually have their protocol right online. So you have a job scheduler and an epoch. It's starting to get into the source code. They might have made a lot more progress. It's been 2 releases since I saw anything about it. But the PHP API doesn't support it. I don't think the Java API supports it. I don't think the Python API supports it. I don't think any of them support it yet. So you'll have to check with the various extensions and see if they're even trying to put it in there.
What tool did you use before you started using Gearman?
I don't like to talk about that. Well, let's see. I stored a queue in MySQL once. That was fun. When you do that, you're going to have a lot of locking issues. You're going to have all sorts of crazy fun there. If you select too many things out of it at once and you overflow the buffer, you're going to crash your database. Did it before. Used a lot of cron jobs. I've stored flat files to go be picked up by cron jobs and processed that way. I mean, I've used all sorts of different things, and I haven't found something better. I've experimented with other things like RabbitMQ, which uses AMQP underneath the hood, which is just a protocol specification, which is like crazy, freaking complex. It was made by Wall Street, basically, and then donated.
It's old, I think.
Yeah, it's not really easy to work with. I have a whole bunch of slides on that too. I could have pulled those up. Red Hat's kind of got their own branded version of their own message queue. It also just depends. But yeah, my old way was just kind of gluing everything together and trying to make it work.
What do you use for bar future task injection? If this epoch stuff is quite ready to go yet, like a regular cron job, ASCII, or
Anything that we use MySQL for some of that right now. I don't like it. The only reason it's there is because it was already there before, and I have to put something new in place. Another thing you can do is you can pass the job to Gearman and say when it's going to get done, and then just keep on pushing it back into the queue. That's a real dirty way of doing it.
Gearman ping pong?
Pretty much. I have work, and you work. Go back. Not ready. So that's, I mean, you could also make queues that have, if you can actually get a list of the queues that are already filled using status, you could actually put like a timeline as a queue and go grab it. The problem there is you don't want to have too many queues in Gearman. That causes some problems as well.
I just had a Python question. I saw, last on the list. So what's the health of the Python community using Gearman? Is it medium? Are they sort of
I have no idea.
the tail dragger?
I'm scared of Python because they care about white space.
Sure.
It's healthier than the PHP community for
Yeah.
Gearman.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Great.
More frequent, the bug or the features getting added and getting committed and getting publicized churn much quicker than the PHP technical extension.
Is there a Django plugin even?
You're bouncing, I haven't checked that, sorry.
Awesome, thanks. Great.
What do you
Yep, there's a Django.
There is. Yeah. I was gonna go. There you go.
Oh, it's old.
Oh, yeah. Right. There might be more than one for all we know.
Yeah.
A couple.
Pretty sure I'm out of time by a lot now.
Thank you.